Welcome to the Wildlife for You podcast and the Old Man Johnson series.
Hey, and welcome to another edition of the Wildlife for You podcast and the Old Man Johnson series. This is the podcast where we take those messy, convoluted, and misunderstood, sometimes hotly debated wildlife issues, and we try to unmuddy the waters for you. I am your host, Stephanie, and I am joined here by my bestest, brilliant, brainy co-host, Daryl Radijak.
Brilliant and brainy, eh? You're trying to butter me up or something.
Well, so actually I'm kind of greasing the skids a little bit, but it's not necessarily for you. It's actually for our audience because you, sir, require no butter today because today's topic just so happens to be right in your wheelhouse, D.
I'm still debating whether or not I require butter because I really do like butter. First off, you did make me blush with the brainy comment, so thank you for that. But secondly, I kind of have a feeling I know what today's topic is going to be because our two friends, Mr. Johnson and his acquaintance, Miss Hazel, they almost came to blows the other day. And here's the thing. It was over deer of all things. They weren't talking about predator, not logging, not trapping, not climate change, not anything that people typically fight about. Of all things, they argued over deer.
And that, my friend, is why I called you brainy and brilliant. I mean, I'd probably call you that anyway, but I know you're sort of known for your love of bears, but if there's anybody out there that knows anything about deer, it is you. So why don't you go ahead and tell the audience your background so that they know it too? Because there's a wee bit more to you than just being a large carnivore biologist.
Well, thank you for that. But the large carnivore biologist thing, it's kind of what drew me into the deer world. And for those listening out there that don't know, both Stephanie and I, we're not just crazy fans of wildlife. We both have our college degrees in wildlife biology. And although Stephanie uses her degree as a pastime, so to speak, while she earns the big bucks and the real money in the private sector, I, on the other hand, have spent my entire career as a wildlife biologist. And although I make far, far less money than Steph, I can proudly say I have never worked a day in my life. Now, I'm just saying that because I love my job. I absolutely love what I do. So waking up in the morning and going to work, it's pretty darn easy.
Okay, now I do love what I do too. And I still love wildlife and I get to buy toys and go on vacations too.
Yeah. I must say you did make a great choice on career paths. Anyhow, back to why I know a little bit about deer. I started my wildlife career working with black bears in and around Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Uh, the the problem, I loved working with bears. I'm not going to lie to you. They were like my pastime, my passion, and everything. The problem was, while I was working with bears, I was working for a small nonprofit called the Appalachian Bear Center. So I was barely making any money. Just curious, do you know how much, I started in 1997. Do you know how much money I was making per year? 1997, which wasn't that too long.
I'm gonna probably lowball this. I'm gonna go for 12,000 a year.
$7,200 per year. I was making $120 a week. Now, I will say they did provide room and board, so I can't complain too much. But it was like you get a paycheck and you bought groceries and you waited for the next paycheck. So the problem was I was barely making any money. And that's kind of when I decided to get a real job and work for the State Wildlife Agency, which back then I was living in Tennessee. So the State Wildlife Agency was the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. So it wasn't too long where I got a entry-level biologist position. And after a couple of years, I saw that the agency was looking for what they call a big game coordinator. And so the big game coordinator, they're the person in charge over big game, which in Tennessee was bears, wild hogs, white-tailed deer, and elk. And so suddenly, before I knew it, I loved bears, but now I'm in charge of the deer and elk in Tennessee. And truthfully, Steph, I loved it. It was, there was so much to do, so much to learn, but managing these animals, it was like a dream come true. I pinch myself all the time for the jobs that I had in my past. But the cool thing was, I was actually in charge of all the charismatic megafauna that the state had to offer. What the heck was? Excuse you.
Come on. That was my buzzer for a jargon alert, and come on. You know that that was so realistic that you actually thought that was a real buzzer.
I I wonder if one of these controls here has a buzzer sound. I should wait. We got to play around one of these days because I got a bunch of like drum rolls and other things, but I don't think I have a buzzer. So continue. I'm sorry. What did you buzz me for?
Well, so I was buzzing you because it was a jargon alert. So flag thrown. So and this is for our listeners, what Daryl means by charismatic, I can say it today, charismatic megafauna is those large wild animals that most people relate to, like deer and elk and bears and those big critters that people are more likely to see and, claim it as their spirit animal and have a natural appeal towards that.
Yeah. So the bottom line, folks, is I have a whole career's worth of managing, studying, chasing, talking about hunting, testing, surveying, and quite simply caring for white-tailed deer.
Which is great for the audience to know because, like we said at the start of today's show, our two favorite characters, Old Man Johnson and hashtag Hazel, well, they got into a heated debate about deer. So, hey D, I don't suppose you happen to have that little spat on tape, do you?
On tape. What the heck stuff? This is 1992 or something. Regardless, believe it or not, I just so happen to have the tape on me. So I'm going to play it for you folks. This is what Stephanie and I endured on our visit with Old Man Johnson and hashtag Hazel. Here's the argument that they got into.
Well, is anyone else worried about this zombie deer disease that's going around? In case you haven't heard, there is this disease called chronic wasting disease. It's caused by these prion proteins, and it's causing deer to walk around like real life zombies. To make matters worse, it's spreading like wildfire, and there's even a chance that people can get it. My gosh, people, wake up and pay attention to the world around you.
Wake up? You're telling me to wake up? You're the one sleepwalking through life, Missy. There's no such thing as this zombie deer disease, that CWD thing that the wildlife agencies are pushing. It's all a hoax. It's a money grab, I tell you. They're just a bunch of money-hungry politicians trying to scare people so they can get more of them federal dollarinis. Yes, CWD, crooked waste of dollars, is what it really stands for. Zombie deer disease. What a crock.
My gosh, zombie deer disease. Oh my. So, I always wondered when we'd cover zombie deer disease. And not only can I see you smiling over there, Dee, but I bet you are just like vibrating in your seat because you are so excited. So it sounds like we're going to be discussing chronic wasting disease today, eh?
Yeah, you know me well, Steph. This is one of my most heartfelt, passionate, and frustrating topics, mostly because of all the misinformation that's out there. And here's the thing it's not so much that people just don't understand this chronic wasting disease topic, although there are a ton of those people that don't understand it. But what drives me nuts is there's actually a small group of people that are actually engineering things and making things up and spreading misinformation intentionally. And sadly, it's either because this disease threatens their way of life, or they simply do it to create chaos and boost the numbers of followers that they have on their social media platforms. Anyway, that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this topic.
Okay, Dee. So since you're the expert here and you have been dealing with deer and with CWD for decades, Why don't I, for this episode, why don't I serve as that inquiring mind, and I'll pretend that I am brand new to this topic, so our listeners, regardless of their CWD knowledge base, they can just learn from this discussion. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I'd like that. Because truth is, Steph, we really, really need folks to understand what's going on here. Because right now, the truth is being inundated by misinformation.
And before we dive into dissecting Ms. Hazel's and Mr. Johnson's comments, is there anything that you just want to say about their discussion?
Yeah, I actually would. I should mention each side of the argument here that they were representing, they're representing the extreme misinformation that's out there regarding CWD. There's one faction, like Miss Hazel's side of the story, that wants to pretend this disease it's catastrophic, that the world of deer is about to collapse and literally disappear. And she even mentioned, I think, that it's even a threat to humans. Now, sadly, I hate to say this, but state wildlife agencies, they've kind of been accused of this kind of standpoint. And I must say, Steph, some of their rhetoric in the very beginning of the discovery of this disease was extreme. Now, thankfully, the state wildlife agencies have toned things down. But then there's the other side of the coin, Mr. Johnson's side. And that's the side that wants to pretend that CWD isn't even a concern or doesn't even exist, like it's a government hoax or something. Kind of like the conspiracy vibe going on. And I swear, it's like we live in a world of extremes nowadays. And as most things, you know this, the truth often lies somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, completely. So, okay, so let's start simple here. Let's first just tell our listeners what chronic wasting disease really is, and let's pretend like folks are hearing about this for the very first time. And remember, describe it to me like I'm an accountant at, First Money Bank who loves watching deer in my backyard. So, let me first ask you, what animals can contract CWD?
Okay, well, here are the basics. Chronic wasting disease, and we'll call it CWD for short. We've already called it CWD for short a couple of times. It's a disease that is found in cervids, which is just a fancy term for the deer family. So, right now, here in North America, CWD can be found in white-tailed deer, in mule deer, and to a lesser extent, because there's less of those animals, it could also be found in elk and moose. Now, remember, there's another cervid or deer family in North America. It's the caribou. And I will tell you, it has not been detected in caribou in North America. Having said that, I should add it has been detected in reindeer in Europe, which is the exact same species as our North American caribou. So, yes, caribou are susceptible. We're lucky because they just haven't contracted it yet here on our side of the pond. So, bottom line, chronic wasting disease is a disease of the deer family.
Okay. Okay. So now, big question. This is going to be harder to explain, but what exactly is the disease and what does it do? And I know you'll likely have to use complex scientific terms, and that's okay as long as you explain them. So if you don't, just know that I am sitting over here with this buzzer sound again, getting ready to call you out on any jargon that you don't explain.
That buzzer sound, I'm waiting to hear it again because I don't think that was a buzzer.
Heard.
Okay, I'll try my best to explain this in layman's terms. But just know, I'm going to use a couple of really, really big words here, but hopefully I'll be able to explain them to everyone. So, okay, chronic wasting disease it's unlike most other diseases we think of because most diseases that we're familiar with, they're caused by either a bacteria or a virus. Instead, CWD or chronic wasting disease is what we call a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, or TSE for short. A TSE is a type of disease that is caused by a prion, which is simply a misfolded strand of protein.
Hmm. So Well, for those folks that hear protein and think meat, let me first explain that protein is like it's like a tiny little machine in your body, a deer's body, whatever. But it's made up of building blocks that we call amino acids. So proteins are normally like they're there to help do lots of important jobs like building and repairing tissue or fighting off germs, but it's the little machine that helps keep things running smoothly inside your body. So when it's misfolded, like what Daryl just said, it can cause problems because it's throwing chaos into those biological processes because it doesn't fit. It's folded wrong. But a protein isn't alive like a virus or a bacteria. So, D, how can you possibly treat that? It's not like you can kill it off, it's not alive. You can't kill it off. So I can already see how CWD would be something that would be hard to deal with. But anyway, so what exactly does this misfolded protein or prion, as you called it, what does it do that's so damaging to deer?
Okay, so when a deer picks up this infectious agent, the prion or prion, however you want to call it, their body recognizes it as a typical protein, which, after all, like you said, our bodies, deer bodies, mammal bodies, like animal bodies, we use protein all the time. So the deer's body picks up this prion and it begins to replicate it or copy it. So it can use it like it does with all the other proteins. The problem is this prion is misfolded. And you mentioned that that's an issue. So because of that misfold, the body can't use it like it uses the normal proteins. And so the deer's replicating it, so it begins to build up within the deer's body. And as luck would have it, it builds up in some pretty important places, like the spinal column, but more importantly, the brain.
So let me see if I'm following. The deer picks up this prion or prion, and the body recognizes it as a simple protein, doesn't recognize that it's misfolded and it still sees it as a protein. So then it starts to copy it like it does with all of the other proteins, but the body can't use it because of that misfold. So it starts to collect in various parts of the body, most notably the brain.
Yeah, sadly, that's exactly what I said.
I was just checking. So, why does this become an issue then in the deer?
Okay, here's where I'm really going to break it down to try to help folks understand. And I promise you, it is so much more technical and complicated than this. But for the average Joe's sake, or Jeanette, or whatever a female
Jane.
name, Joe and who?
Jane?
Jane. Oh, yeah. For the average Joe and Jane, think of all those prions that are gathering in the brain. Think of them like they're little knives. Now, they can't be used by the body because that misfold. So they begin to pile up and pile up and pile up. And before long, there's so many of these in there, they begin to perforate the cells. That's why I said they're kind of like little knives. They begin to poke holes within the cells within the brain. And this goes on and on and on. And those little holes that are poked in the brain eventually begin to cause brain issues and dysfunction.
So, can I ask a quick question?
Go ahead, my dear.
Oh, dear topic. I see what you did there. Good one. Okay, so anyhow, you mentioned the classification of this disease earlier as a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. I believe everyone knows what transmissible means, but the spongiform encephalopathy intrigued me because now that you just explained it that way, I think I understand it because encephalopathy means of the head, or more specifically of the brain. Spongiform, I imagine, means a sponge or like, lots of little holes in it. So now that you described what CWD prions do to deer, it's contagious. It pokes holes in their brain, and so therefore transmissible spongiform encephalopathy makes actually perfect sense. So, jargon ain't so bad once it's actually explained to you.
Ain't so bad to understand. It's still a little hard to say, though.
No kidding.
Yeah, but understanding it just takes a little more time, and more importantly, it takes a willingness for people to learn. Now, unfortunately, social media and its world of snippets and small bits of information, it is not the best place to learn about this stuff.
Yeah, for real. So, okay, so real quick, are there other diseases like this that people might be more familiar with? Like maybe something they've heard of before?
Yeah, these TSEs, so I don't have to say transmissible spongiform encephalopathy again, they're in a whole family of diseases that some people may have actually heard of. So in sheep, there's this disease called scabies. Have you ever heard of it?
Uh,
Okay. Well, maybe people haven't heard of scabies, but scabies is also a TSE. Now, I know you're going to hear this, but have you ever heard of mad cow disease?
I have heard of angry bovine disease, yes.
Yes. Mad cow disease is bovine spongiform encephalopathy. So, same family of diseases. Now, in the human world, although it's extremely, extremely rare, there is a disease called CJT or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Bad, bad thing. But that disease is caused by prions that trigger brain cell death in humans. And sadly, it causes like rapid dementia and soon onset and eventual death.
Okay. So now that you mentioned all of this, I'm thinking back to what hashtag Hazel said and how CWD could be a threat to humans.
Well, let me nip that in the bud right now. That's one of the things that Hazel said that infuriated me because that's part of the CWD misinformation campaign that drives me nuts. Now, as far as we know, CWD has never caused any sickness or death in humans whatsoever. But as you know, news media loves to use scare tactics to drum up viewership. This is exactly one of those cases.
Yeah, first, I agree that news sources should be mandated to be like not-for-profit organizations or something so they can stop with the extremism. But Dee, you said mad cow disease a minute ago, which again is in bovines, or as everybody knows, cows, mad cow disease, cows. Didn't that one jump the species barrier and kill people in like the UK and something 30 years ago?
It did. And that's exactly why the Center for Disease Control and all sorts of government agencies they issue warnings about eating deer infected with CWD. Now, like I said, there's never been a case where CWD harmed any humans, but I think that's in the back of their mind. The fact that mad cow disease jumped from cows to humans and killed humans, that is what they're worried about. But to the best of our knowledge, eating deer meat has never ever caused any problems in people.
Okay, so precautionary out of an abundance of caution, probably is
Yes.
why they're saying that. So, all right, so now that we know what CWD does to a deer's brain, what exactly does it do to the deer in general? Like, what do people see if a deer is infected with CWD? I'm assuming they don't walk around with a little post-it sign above them
Yeah.
that says, "Hey, yo,
So
CWD."
how do you know a deer has CWD?
Yeah.
Well, first off, you have to understand that it's going to take a period of time from when a deer first picks up those misfolded proteins, those prions. It's going to take some time for that deer's body to replicate it enough so that it begins to cause those perforations in the deer's brain. So there's this period of latency, and I'll describe that. And that's simply it's simply a time when the deer is infected but not showing any symptoms. It's like the disease is progressing within the deer's body, but it's not impacting the deer. That's that period of latency. So a lot of times these deer they may have CWD, but they will appear perfectly normal.
Okay. And it makes sense, right? Like you have the things that cause the flu before the flu starts actually being symptomatic or displaying itself. So that's probably what gives Old Man Johnson and so many others the idea that CWD really isn't that harmful because you could have a CWD positive deer that still actually appears perfectly healthy.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I will tell you, it varies tremendously within deer, but sometimes after a deer picks up that prion, it may take a year or two for the deer to display disease symptoms from CWD. But there's more and more studies being done, and they're finding Some deer, it hits them really fast. It may take as little as a few months. Now, when a deer does begin to show symptoms, these symptoms of CWD, the outward signs of it, they may start very inconspicuously. So let me ask you this, Steph. If an animal is suffering from a brain issue, how would you picture it behaving?
Well, I think the best way for people to understand brain disorders is to put it into perspectives that they are more likely to understand. So, let's take humans as an example. One of the most well-known brain disorders, obviously, I think would be Alzheimer's, which is a form of dementia. And there's, I would assume, probably a lot of people out there that know someone or have heard of someone dealing with Alzheimer's. And it's usually a sad, sad situation because the person suffering from that disease, they kind of, they forget their lives, they forget who they are, and when it gets bad enough, they forget how to even take care of themselves. Their mind and their body slowly deteriorate over time.
Yeah, that is a very sad but great way to describe kind of what happens in deer. Once CWD becomes established and those prions begin perforating that deer's brain, they very much act like a human who's beginning to display symptoms of Alzheimer's or dementia. They sometimes wander around listlessly. Now, although at first the deer may appear healthy, it may wander around unlike most other deer. And what I mean by that, it's because it's forgetting what it's like to be a deer. For example, a deer with CWD may be up and active at times that you're not used to seeing deer. It may wander into the road, not realizing the dangers that roads or even humans may pose. And heck, it may even forget it needs to run from predators, a pack of coyotes, wolves, whatever predators are in the area. The deer just doesn't know any better. It doesn't run from them. So, as you can imagine, CWD infected deer, they begin to die at a higher rate or at a younger age than uninfected deer.
Okay, and that's kind of self-perpetuates Mr. Johnson's claim that CWD is not real because, what they see is a deer being eaten by a pack of coyotes or wolves, not realizing that CWD likely caused that deer to be eaten. Same with roadkill, right? Like they would likely claim that a car killed the deer and not CWD. So in other words, they don't understand the causal factor and they only look at that final factor.
Exactly. And on a side note, there was actually a study that showed that predators are more likely to take down CWD infected deer than a completely healthy deer. And just so you know, CWD infected deer, they're also more likely to be struck by vehicles. A lot of the surveillance that state wildlife agencies did, they would key in on vehicle collisions with deer because of that listlessness, that not paying attention. So a diseased deer is more likely to get struck by a vehicle. But here's the thing: lots of people, especially hunters, they see these predator kills, these vehicle strikes. They see that as a predator or a vehicle problem than a disease problem. So going back to the impact of CWD on deer, in really advanced stages of the disease itself, like if it survives like all the vehicles, all the predators, if the deer survives long enough, that deer, very much like that Alzheimer's, that deer will struggle to even feed itself because, like we said, it forgets how to be a deer. Now, at this point, or at that point, when they've forgotten to eat, they may become very emaciated. They'll appear listless. They'll be lethargic.
Yeah.
They, yeah, they don't look good.
And let me guess, that right there is the impetus for hashtag Hazel calling it the zombie deer disease.
Exactly, smart woman there. See, now you know why I had you for a co-host.
Oh, that's the only reason I'm sure. But I imagine a deer with CWD is far more likely to die of secondary causes, the predator, the car, before it ever gets to that zombie brain stage.
Yeah, and again, this is why The news media and their zombie title irritates me so much. It's extremism to the max. You don't see those zombie deer walking around. So, Steph, let me ask you a question because this is where hunters struggle to understand the impacts of CWD. Now, you're an outdoorsy girl, at least you used to be. Of all the times you've been in the field, whether you're hunting or helping me with wildlife surveys, how many freshly killed deer carcasses did you stumble upon?
Geez. I've been off trailing in some crazy out of the way places, but truthfully, there are not many. I can think of maybe a handful of times coming up on a deer carcass, but that's over decades, plural, like decades, more than one decade of tromping through the woods. Outside of a vehicle strike, and killing the deer on the road, when a deer wanders off into the woods, you're not going to know about it. You're not going to stumble. It's not going to happen. You're not going to know.
Yeah, again, your smarts and experience, they're shining through, my dear. The fact is, deer die all the time for various reasons. Deer die of old age out there, and you never find the body. But the thing is, we're not finding piles of dead deer out there in nature. That's because scavengers will clean up a single carcass pretty darn quickly, which leads me to one of the biggest misconceptions out there from Mr. Johnson's camp. Now, although he didn't mention it in his discussion with Hazel, I often hear hunters say how EHD is a much bigger threat to deer than CWD, and that could not be farther from the truth.
Meh. Do you feel that?
I smelt that
That
too.
was that was that was the jargon buzzer again, buddy. And you were doing so well, but even with all that biologinese stuff in there, you were doing great. But all right, buzzer sound, flag on the field. What in the world is this EHD thing that you mentioned? You don't want to just let me run crazy with that acronym, and why are you talking about it?
All right. Well, good catch. Yeah, as soon as I said it, I was in the back of my mind waiting for the buzzer. So EHD is the acronym for epizootic hemorrhagic disease. Now, this is another like very notable disease within the deer family, but opposed to chronic wasting disease, epizootic hemorrhagic disease, or EHD for short, it's a viral disease that is passed on to deer through this biting insect called a midge.
Ooh, now them I know, and them are some annoying little shites.
Yes, they are. But now, this EHD virus that those midges carry and they pass on to deer, that virus is naturally occurring. But when there's a bad outbreak, it can have a drastic effect on the local deer herd. You see, there's two forms of EHD. There's this chronic form and this acute form. Now, deer that develop the acute form of EHD, they die rapidly, typically within a day or two. They get that, it's bad juju for them. Now, ironically, when they do get that acute form, they develop a high fever and they kind of exhibit similar behaviors. And so, like, they're hot, they're sweating, they're thirsty, so they go to water to quench their thirst. Now, inevitably, if there's a bad EHD outbreak, you are likely to find multiple carcasses, multiple dead deer, all piled up around a water source or a pond.
Okay. I think I've actually been privy to that one locally and sometime in the last 20 something years, but I would imagine it is easier at least to discover that since you're just said there's multiple carcasses all at once and not to be morbid, but that combination of lots of dead bodies around water probably going to create quite the stench. So yeah, I can see why die-offs from EHD would be more visible to hunters because deer are dying in mass, unlike CWD. But but D, you mentioned that EHD was viral and that there was a chronic form of it. So can deer survive EHD outbreaks?
Yeah, they absolutely can. It's just like the flu in humans. If the deer get that chronic form, they can absolutely overcome that virus. And when they do, they develop an immunity to it for a while, since they'll then have the antibodies that originally fought off the disease. So they're protected from EHD for a number of years.
Okay. And I imagine if EHD is viral, meaning it's alive, it will eventually die out in nature due to like the cold or whatever, thus making the disease very cyclical in nature.
Yeah, it's highly variable, but bad EHD outbreaks tend to occur about every 5 to 10 year intervals. Because most of those surviving deer, like I said, they develop an immunity to it. The bottom line, though, and the biggest distinction between the threat of EHD and CWD is EHD will die out and go away, and the herd will likely rebound. With CWD, the causal factor is that prion, it's that protein. It's not alive, it does not die out. And deer can spread prions from deer to deer. We call it shedding the prions, but when they become infected, they build it up in their body and they can excrete it through urine, through all this other stuff. But they can spread this from deer to deer by licking each other through their urine and feces. Like I said, if they poop in an area or pee in an area and then they eat in that particular area, those prions can persist in the environment. In other words, once a deer herd gets CWD, they're likely never going to get rid of it, and its prevalence is going to keep growing and growing and growing.
So, real quick, Dee, explain to our listeners what you mean by prevalence.
Good catch again. What I mean by prevalence is the percentage of deer that are infected by that disease. Something rolling around in that pretty little mind of yours?
Yeah, I'm thinking if CWD is naturally occurring and it's been around for forever, wouldn't like every single deer have it by now? Like, wouldn't you already see your prevalence being near like 100% already?
That's yeah, that's exactly the thing. My irritation is like flowing today. Just so you know, I had Mr. Johnson say in a later conversation I had with him that CWD has been around forever. But we know that's not true. Now, as far as we know, CWD was first detected in like the late 1960s, and it was associated with this disease, wildlife disease lab in Colorado, that once looked at scapies in sheep. That's kind of where they discovered it. That's where they first described it. But if you recall, scapies was one of those TSE diseases that we mentioned earlier. Now, we have no idea the exact origin of the disease, but we're almost 100% sure CWD first started in that area. So it started spreading in the West, likely Colorado, maybe, well, 1960s, over 50 years ago.
Just to make sure I'm clear, we're not tying that lab to the spread of the disease. We're just saying that that lab was looking at scabies in
Yeah.
sheep and
Well, we
there's
can't. We'd love to pin it, but we can't. Like, you can't say with 100% certainty. There's accusations thrown out all the time by both sides, and you can't say with 100% certainty this is what caused it or anything like that. So just
yes.
that's why I'm dancing around that topic, because everything's pointing there, but you just have a shadow of a doubt.
That completely makes sense. And dance as much as you need. I'd like to be on that dance card. So, um, I know CWD was mostly a deer disease in Western animals, but didn't it make the big jump geographically a few decades ago?
Yeah, yeah. CWD primarily stayed out west for a number of decades, but in 2002 there was a big jump, and it appeared in some deer in Wisconsin, which is east of the Mississippi River. Now, at that point in time, that discovery in Wisconsin, it sent a shockwave amongst state wildlife agencies everywhere in the east. So they started like intensive testing for CWD. And just so you know, I was the deer biologist in the early 2000s with Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. We were CWD testing way back then because this scare of this disease approaching. So, nearly all the states in the East, when we started testing in the early 2000s, they were CWD free. We couldn't find it. But slowly, over time, more and more states started discovering CWD. Now, typically, when it's discovered, its prevalence or the percentage of deer that have it, it's tiny. It's usually less than 1%. You'll test thousands of deer and you might only find one or two deer. But that
Okay.
prevalence slowly grows over time.
So that growing prevalence, though, is proof positive that CWD hasn't been on the landscape for a very long time.
Exactamundo, ma'am.
All right. So I'm curious, Dee, how did CWD make such a big jump eastward? I imagine if deer were spreading this, nose to nose or, whatever, this would take a long time to spread completely across the country. And I would also imagine that there would be those pretty big geographic barriers that kept some deer populations isolated, like, rivers, mountain ranges, big desert, whatever, those big geographic barriers.
Yeah, and this is kind of just like we can't point the finger at a lab or any causal factor because there's absolutely no way to know for sure. But it's almost guaranteed, like you said, that nose to nose eating from an infected area, it's going to move slowly. So it's almost guaranteed that humans helped spread this disease much faster than Mother Nature ever could. Now, we always said, as biologists talking about this, said disease can travel about 70 miles an hour down a highway, which which is about as fast as a truck can travel. Now, it's not known exactly how it happened, but the movement of infected deer, a live deer or a dead deer, that more than likely contributed to its eastward spread. Now, it's believed nowadays, this is so sad because it was contained in that Colorado area for a while and some of the nearby western states. It's now believed that CWD exists in about 36 of the 50 states, in, just so you know, many of the Canadian provinces as well.
So since this is such a new disease, we're not really even seeing the impact of it yet, I'm betting.
Yeah, that's my other frustration, which sadly mostly comes from this hunter point of view. Because CWD is almost certainly not a disease that's impacting people now. Like a few small concentrated areas. But by and large, people aren't seeing any impact now. The vast majority of deer herds don't have it, or they have it at extremely low prevalence, say less than 5% of the deer that are infected.
Yeah. So I could imagine if in the beginning, say only 5 out of 100 deer contract CWD, and it takes some time for the deer to, have that disease develop within them. And then that deer goes off and it dies on its own, unlike what did you say, the epizootic hemorrhagic disease, the EHD, where they can die off in mass quantities. People wouldn't even think because they're not seeing that. So they're not even thinking that CWD exists at all. So because it feels unnoticeable.
Yeah. And that's why so many people like Mr. Johnson are blowing it off, saying it doesn't exist. What's scary is that over time, so you know, Steph, it could take decades and decades. But what do you think would happen to a deer herd if CWD prevalence grows from like 5% to 10% to 20%, maybe all the way up to 50%? Do you think that would have an impact on the deer herd?
I think it would impact the rate of progression and oh my gosh, right? Like the way you described it, deer with CWD, they don't live as long as the uninfected deer. So once those prevalence rates get way up there, there's no way it will not have an impact on a deer population. You're literally decreasing the life expectancy of deer, period. So sadly, and because like you just said, it could take a while for that to actually, be noticeable. I mean, I hate to say this, it's not necessarily a problem for us that we're going to see. It's not a problem. We might not, we might not have to deal with it as intimately, but for future generations, yeah, big time. Our kids, and and your grandkids, because I'm not going to ever have any, will be the ones dealing with the impacts of CWD.
Yeah. And sadly, since it's so hard to see before our eyes, many people like Mr. Johnson, they call it a hoax.
Yeah, humans are bad about that, right? Like the not seeing equals not believing. I mean, that's one of our favorite cliches. So I can kind of see why they would think the hoax part, but you can explain Mr. Johnson's claims. Well, actually, can you? Can you explain his claims of that whole what did he say? The dollarinis, that this is all political and a money grab.
I think you could sense my frustration sometimes. It'd be comical if it wasn't so frustrating to hear these claims from people saying CWD is simply a scam to make money. The truth of the matter is, Steph, CWD costs us money, like a tremendous amount too. Because once this disease is discovered, state agencies lose a ton of money. That's because instead of focusing their efforts on fruitful wildlife management practices, they now have to devote a ton of time and effort trying to figure out the impact, like where CWD primarily resides, trying to keep it from spreading. And this takes an extraordinary amount of surveillance, or what we call disease testing. So, all that extra equipment and manpower to combat this, it has to come from somewhere. Now, in the beginning, state wildlife agencies were simply sucking up those extra costs. But fortunately, the federal government created this pot of money, mostly out of the USDA, which is the Department of Agriculture. They kind of set aside a pot of money, millions of dollars, to alleviate some of the burdens that these state wildlife agencies were incurring from all the additional CWD work.
Yeah, and yet people think that folks are getting rich off of that money. So that sounds kind of absurd.
It's crazy absurd. And sadly, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, follow the money. It drives me
Oh,
nuts.
follow the money. Oh God, yeah, that would irritate the snot out of me as well. So not only is your world as a wildlife biologist turned upside down, and you have to do all of this work that you really don't want to be doing because that's not why you went into it, this jam that you're in, but then people are claiming that you're doing it for money. So yeah, I totally detest being part of society sometimes.
Yeah, and think the thing that bothers me most is that people are unwilling to learn. Now, I'm saying this from both sides of the issue. Like the sky is falling crowd, they're just as bad as the nothing to see here crowd. Now, we need both sides to stop listening to these social media sound bites, and we need them to become invested in the topic. And we need people to talk to the experts. And I'm sorry, Steph, but folks on social media who are fishermen or environmentalists or other social media personalities, they're not likely to be experts on deer disease. Go to the biologists, go to the state wildlife agencies, go to the people who've been studying and dealing with this disease rather than their buddy Jeb who heard something from their cousin Wilbur that knows the truth about what's really going on.
Yeah, and Dee, I understand your passion and your frustration on this topic, and I also understand. One of the things I hear all the time is, "Oh, well, so and so is an avid sportsman, so they must know." Or, "I've been hunting deer for 45 years, so I must know." No, actually, you don't.
Yeah, and what my follow up, because they say it all, oh, I'm in the woods all the time. And like they talk about these biologists that are just behind the computer. They don't realize we spend more time in the outdoors than they do mostly. But my counter to just being present in the moment, like you absorb all this information, I'm present in my body all the time. But when my knee goes out, I go see a knee doctor because I don't know. And even though it's my knee and I've been there the whole time, I don't know what's going on with my knee. And so this idea that, oh, they're a hunter or they're an outdoorsman, so they would know. No, sometimes you got to go to the experts in that particular field, the knee
That
doctor.
is a really, really good analogy, sir. So, but yeah, so I think. I actually get it, right? Like I get you. I understand your passion and your frustrations on that topic. And I will admit this, don't let it go to your head, but I also think you
Big
did
head.
a pretty good job explaining the basics of chronic wasting disease. But sadly, this sounds, more like a disease of the future, and the problem's going to be getting the people of the present to understand it.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it because the people of the present, it's not sinking in, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, anyway, is there anything else you want to add?
You got a few more hours because there's a ton of rabbit holes we can go down.
Well, even though Alice says that rabbit holes are fun, and good places to go to, I would say that since we've gone on as long as we have, what do you say we save those rabbit holes for another episode, sir?
I think that may be a good idea because we're hitting that almost hour mark. We're like 52 minutes in. So you want to, I guess, start wrapping things up for us? Oh, wait. Before you do that, because I said don't go to social media, don't talk to
Deb.
the wrong people. I know there's something that I should share with everyone because besides talking to your state wildlife agency, and I'll be the first to admit, sometimes they're hard to pin down or get a normal human to respond to you. For the best information out there when it comes to CWD, if you're truly interested, you could search on the web and visit or look up. It's cwd-info.org. I'm always telling people to verify the source of their information. That's cwd-info.org. Much of the information that's compiled on that website is from state wildlife agencies and universities that are studying this disease. Now, there are lots of other sites that will have information about CWD, but they tend to be biased. They tend to be those extremes, like it's the end of the world or it's a scam type of thing. So be very mindful. We're talking about a real life, real world disease here. Let's go to the experts that have that. So anyway, okay, proceed, my friend.
Okay. So, well, thank you, sir, for your PSA and your shout out to the reliable and unbiased sources for science. We do appreciate that. But okay, so once again, folks, we love talking to you about wildlife and trying to clear up some of that misinformation that you hear out there, especially about CWD and other diseases that impact the wildlife that we love. But we also love listening to you and what you may have heard from, oh, I don't know, Old Man Johnson or hashtag Hazel. So if you have any topics that you'd like for us to explore, please reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. And you can either reach us through the Wildlife for You Facebook Messenger, or you can email us direct at wfyquestions@gmail.com.
Yes, we would absolutely love to hear from you with whatever topic ideas you may have. Any compliments, and of course, there will be no criticisms whatsoever, but if you do have those, send them to Steph. But we thank you for listening. And remember, when it comes to wildlife, your knowledge often means their existence. So thank you and be well.